It is my pleasure to introduce the start of the next panel. Again, this is Meeting Climate Goals Through Corporate and Nonprofit Engagement. Our moderator for the session is Meg Arnold, who's the Managing Director of Valley Vision. I'll turn it over to Meg. Meg, it's all yours.
Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for being here this morning. I think we've got a great conversation and to come with some fabulous and very expert panelists, and I'm delighted to have the honor and somewhat high bar of following Chair Nichols in the proceedings this morning. But my name is Meg Arnold. I'm Managing Director of an organization in the Sacramento area called Valley Vision, and the work that we do spans a number of different sectors, including the clean economy. I've been involved in, I feel like my mic is coming in and out. I've been involved in aspects of the clean economy for a number of years in a number of different dimensions, but won't belabor that point here this morning. I'll use this instead. Ooh, that's louder. And what I think I'd like to do first is turn to our three panelists, ask each of you to introduce yourselves briefly, and then we'll tee up the conversation.
Okay, great. Are we going to use this?
Should I pass it? It's mine.
All right.
Yours is working?
Okay, mine's working. Okay. I'm Annie Notthoff, and I'm the California Advocacy Director with the Natural Resources Defense Council. And I really enjoyed the comments yesterday from Governor Brown and Chair Nichols right now, because it's a good excuse for many of the wrinkles I have were earned on each one of many of those accomplishments that California has been able to do in the last couple of decades on climate. So I have been had the honor of being involved with NRDC's legal and technical staff on many of the AB 32, AB 1493, SB 32, all of these statutes that we've put in place in California, which I think have had a real benefit in promoting technological development and given businesses certainty for investing in clean energy, and is largely responsible for having the kind of climate progress with economic prosperity that California is now enjoying.
And good morning. My name is Lisa Alexander. I'm Vice President of Customer Solutions for SoCal Gas. For those of you who aren't aware of the company, we're the nation's largest natural gas distribution company. We bring heat, electricity to over 20 million residential customers as well as businesses, spanning San Joaquin Valley down to the Mexican border, the Pacific Ocean, all the way to our borders with Arizona and Nevada. One of the things that our company is very motivated by and excited by is finding significant ways to contribute to address greenhouse gases. And that's not just a soundbite. If you listen to our parent company's analyst conference from a couple weeks ago, that Sempra Energy, you'll see that working within the bounds and helping achieve greenhouse gas targets is a core part of our business strategy. And we're doing real things today to advance that. At SoCal Gas, we currently are advancing waste-to-energy projects that addresses the short-lived climate pollutants from dairies and other waste sources, and takes those pollutants, stops it from being emitted to the atmosphere, and instead turns it into renewable energy. And those are real projects that we're investing in today. We're also investing in power-to-gas technology and have a demonstration at UC Irvine where we take excess solar electricity and turn it into hydrogen that's using to power the campus power plant. That's another way that we're trying to advance towards a low-carbon vision for California and beyond. And lastly, we've partnered with others, our technologists, in collaboration with industry and policymakers, including ARB and AQMD, have collaborated to bring to market the cleanest engine in the world that's commercially available for heavy-duty trucks today. So those are just three examples of how we're putting our money where our mouth is, and we're putting our efforts really towards materially bringing us towards a low-carbon future.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody. Rounding out the panel here this morning, my name is Chris Benjamin, and I lead the sustainability team at PG&E, another investor-owned utility in California. For those who aren't familiar with PG&E, we provide gas and electricity to about 16 million people throughout Northern and Central California. And I've been at PG&E for about 11 years, and our team plays a strategic communications, reporting, and engagement role for the company. And it's just a really important conference. An important topic is just the action that we all can take, particularly those of us in the business community, to address climate change. The science is clear. You can see it from the cartoons that we saw a little earlier this morning. And it is really critical that we take action. It's something that our company has had a long-standing commitment to. We were in Paris expressing our strong support for that historic accord, and that continues today. And maybe just picking up on some of the themes that we've heard, it's just I think a really interesting time around collaborating with new partners in new ways. Continuing to demonstrate progress and success in reducing emissions, but doing it in a way that helps grow the economy. And also, I think, trying new things, piloting new things and scaling those within our business and within our state. That's certainly something that we're very focused on at PG&E and learning what works so that we can really harness the power of utilities, the scale that we can bring to this particular challenge. So look forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. Thanks to all of you. And Chris, thanks for providing part of the transition as we move into this conversation by mentioning the enormous business presence that was at the Paris talks, and which has been obviously growing over the years. But if you did a time lapse back to much earlier series of climate talks, there was literally no business presence whatsoever. And so I think this panel and our conversation today will really hope to get to the heart of what has been driving that change and the increase in that level of activity from the private sector, from the for-profit sector in many regards, and what are some of the sources of motivation, and what are some of the sources of challenge in integrating climate mitigation and climate adaptation work into the business operations of either a very large multinational all the way down to a much smaller scale. And then how can the private sector and the for-profit sector partner, and how is it partnering much more effectively and much more productively these days with the nonprofit and the NGO sector, and particularly in I'm going to say our changing climate, meaning the DC one, particularly in the context of the changing federal climate. How are these partnerships all the more necessary and all the more impactful going forward? So that's just to set the stage for what we're hoping to be able to get to amongst the three or the four of us this morning. And then opening to Q&A with all of you as we get a little bit further into the time. I think we've got right up until 11 o'clock for this conversation. So I think what I'd like to move to first is the issue of motivation. NGOs, nonprofits sometimes have something of the luxury of being motivated directly by mission, by being very mission focused on climate and climate related activities. And we can debate whether that's a luxury or not, but businesses are motivated, as we all know, by somewhat different measures and metrics. And so how does climate action, climate mitigation work come to become a priority? What are the different levers that get pulled or pushed within the business community to increase that level of activation? And I'd like to turn that either to Lisa or to Chris, and whoever wants to go first.
Okay, well, I'll take a first shot, and I think I'll start by doing a flashback to what I think is a really good case study, and that is Southern California 20 years ago and beyond, where we faced a really significant air pollution and smog issue. There were days that children's sports had to be canceled, days that sessions were canceled. You couldn't see the mountains beyond downtown Los Angeles for the smog. And through a very deliberate effort with NGOs, with local and state agencies, with private industry, including the manufacturing community, we have made significant progress. So today our pollution is half of what it was a few decades ago. Instances of chronic asthma and chronic disease related to fine particulates and other causes related to poor air quality are cut in half. You see lung capacity of children twice that what it was 20 years ago. So I think that is a micro view of a model that can be used to solve the much bigger issue of climate change. So what worked there was a combination of regulation, incentives, active participation and dialogue, and I think the alignment of the regulation and incentives from the business perspective was a really important piece for everyone to support the change going forward. So those are my initial thoughts. Looking towards what Southern California accomplished in air quality, I think can be a basis for looking ahead. As we start tackling climate change as a utility, we realize that we need to evolve. I've got, hopefully, a much longer runway, another 20 years, and I don't want to be turning the lights off on my business 20 years from now. But I also have a daughter and grew up in a generation where we very much cared about the environment. So I think there's, in the new generation of leadership, there's less this view of a dichotomy between business growth and carbon, and more an embracing of the fact that we can all be a part of the clean energy solution. Back to the Southern California example, when we saw those dramatic reductions in the last decade or two in air pollution, we saw that at the same time that we saw a significant increase in the causes of pollution. There were more people, there was more activity at the ports, more trucks and cars on the roads. So we were able to effect a solution that both helped the air quality while also continuing economic activity.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just echo a lot of those same themes in terms of kind of the why. I think it starts with just the values, the commitment, the environmental commitment, the sustainability commitment, of the organization, whether that's a company, an NGO, what have you, or city. And for us, I think to your point, there are just, it's something that we know that our customers really care about and are interested in. It's something that policymakers are obviously very focused on. Our employees are very excited, to be working on projects that help address climate change, and here in California. And increasingly, investors are focusing on this, and for those of us who have operations in California, this is a real plus from an investment standpoint in terms of the low carbon portfolio and policies here. So, I guess there's just a very strong business case for taking these steps to help reduce risk. By acting earlier, you're reducing the risk of costs and other things down the future. And not to mention, and I think we may talk about this a little bit later, the risk of resilience, to a changing climate, not just reducing emissions in the first place. And so we have a lot of different stakeholders, and that's what is very important to them. And we actually a little over a year ago formed an external sustainability advisory council with 10 folks who are external to PG&E to really help serve as a sounding board and provide insights and advice to us as a company as we look forward. Roland Wang from NRDC is a member of that, along with many others representing environmental, some former regulators, folks that are very concerned about customers and communities. And it's been really a helpful resource for us. But one of the things that's come through loud and clear through that forum is the importance of taking action on climate change. And one of our council members had an interesting just kind of concept, thinking about the utility as a climate solutions provider. And it's something that just kind of an interesting frame to think about the role we play through our various programs and incentives. So so I think there's just a really strong business case for doing this work.
And when you talk about incentives, I think everyone would agree that laws matter, and policies matter. So there can be a business case, but there's also a legal case for businesses to be engaged in this and at the table. So, I mean, one of the things that we've been fortunate here in California is that we don't have to debate with leading business folks here in California whether or not we have a climate program. And we have had some major business leaders as well as major employers that have come to the table to help fashion policies that work for business. So you can either be at the table or on the table, right? And so when businesses are engaged in helping develop those laws and regulations, I think you see the benefit of that in terms of getting something that works for the economy as well as the environment.
Absolutely, and there's the legal impact of laws and regulations, obviously, but there's the ability of regulations clearly to shift and to shape business cases and to make economical or smart or less risky a certain course of action that without that regulatory underpinning would not necessarily have made business sense, so to speak. So it's really the junction of the leadership, the policy and regulatory leadership of the state taken together with some of the market actions that then become possible.
I can give an example of that.
That'd be great.
So what we see with the low carbon fuel standard, that drives credits towards renewable fuels. And in partnership with the RINs from the federal side, and hopefully we'll be able to preserve those, we've seen in the heavy duty trucking sector, over 60% of trucks that have compressed natural gas engines, 60% of their fuel comes from renewable sources. And they're renewable sources like landfills, but also from dairies. So what we see is those trucks can now operate either carbon neutral or, if 100% sourced from dairy waste, carbon negative. And that's in large part due to the LCFS and the RIN credits. So I think that's a great example of how the credits flow to allow businesses like UPS or Frito-Lay make really meaningful decisions for their business, but also for greenhouse gas.
Yeah, absolutely. I was flipping my page over to try to find something I'd written down that that Mary Nichols had noted earlier this morning, but that was pertinent to that, but not going to find that. Would have been great. So, Chris, you'd mentioned the human side, the customer, the employee side of things, and certainly there are indications that the new millennials, which I find hard to say without smiling, the millennials, thank you, are very motivated by buying from and being involved with companies that are seen to be climate leaders. And as well, the employee group coming up through now is really strongly motivated in that way. Are you seeing that as well? As a way of pulling companies into action rather than pushing them, perhaps regulatorily?
Absolutely. I mean, if you just kind of step back from it, it's a really exciting time to be working in California, working on these issues, working at a utility in California. There's just a tremendous amount of change taking place. I think Chair Nichols just referenced the pace of technology and all of the changes underway, which is really attractive to people that are interested in energy. And so we have just a lot of enthusiastic people coming to work for the company and wanting to work on these different projects, which are trying new things. And beyond that, I think you really can't underestimate the power of the workforce and people. And so like many companies, and I'm sure you have the same, we've got sort of green teams of employees that may work in human resources or finance or some other part of the business, but they want to get involved. And so we've got a very active team and put them to work around waste competitions and water pledge campaigns and looking at ways to solve the commuting challenge and all these sorts of things. And And that to me is just really exciting because it allows people to really get involved and play a role.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would echo that. We have a number of similar programs. I think I would build on it as well, is that the utility, especially as we evolve towards addressing climate change in a very meaningful way, affords lots of opportunities for people who are interested to help, whether it's conservation, energy efficiency, demand response. There's a lot of really interesting work going on in stodgy old utilities. We're also, as we evolve into new things like waste to energy and power to gas, we're looking for active, creative technologists to help create what that new future looks like, both from a business model perspective as well as a technology perspective. And that includes policy. So if anyone out there is interested in talking more about how they could find that kind of creativity in the utility, talk to me afterwards, because we're looking for people to bring that fresh environmental perspective to bear. I would add, though, that we have the generation of millennials, but in our state, it really is a tale of two cities. We have a huge number of disadvantaged communities, communities who don't live in permitted housing, who burn wood that they find in their backyards, which creates incredible health, air quality issues in the valley. In Southern California, our service territory, over 30% of our customers are low income. They qualify for programs. They earn below the poverty line. So as we consider the future and as we consider carbon, there's a significant section of our population, migrant workers and others, documented, undocumented, who are part of this, and there needs to be policies that support their inclusion, and also broader thinking to help them enjoy the benefits of renewable energy and a low carbon future. And make sure that things are affordable and that we do keep an eye on resilience as we move towards more innovative technologies.
I'll just add, I think that that's really one of the keys to California maintaining our climate leadership, and that is that we need to make sure that the clean economy is working for everyone. And that's some of the things that Chair Nichols talked about that we're wrestling with this year as we extend the price on carbon beyond 2020, is really how do we guarantee that we're going to have more localized air quality benefits for disadvantaged communities. And I'll just say, in terms of millennials, I've been at NRDC for a few decades now, and I often am contacted by people like, how do I get involved in environmental activism and stuff? And I am pleased to say, in the last decade or so, I can say, well, you don't just have to come to an NGO. There's a lot of businesses in California that you can go to, and you can really shake things up from the inside. So the distribution of climate concern has really broadened. Kind of concurrent with our laws too, I will say.
That's a great point. There are a lot of more diversity of ways of that individuals can get involved and have an impact. So Annie, on our when we had our prep call a week or so ago, you talked, you shared with us some of the changes in approach that NRDC is expecting to be undertaking in the context of the changing federal landscape and the climate for climate, and you set out sort of a couple of different spheres of influence for us on the call that NRDC was thinking about, first at the federal level and then at the state level, and talked perhaps a little bit about what your organization's expectations were for going forward, for what kind of role you'd be playing. So could you share a little bit about that, not just necessarily about NRDC, but what you see peer organizations and NGOs shifting to?
I think that, one of the things you are seeing, and this is specific to NRDC and a few of our sister NGOs, is that we are in court a lot more, and we are really doubling down on doing, basically, NRDC was established to make sure the federal government carried out the environmental laws and public health laws that they had recently passed in the 1970s. So right now this is in our wheelhouse. This is like, we're engaged in 15 lawsuits since the inauguration. We have already settled one on the favorably an Endangered Species Act case on the rusty patch bumblebee is now going to continue to be listed, even though the Trump administration tried to put a hold on that when they first came in. And just to talk a little bit about the courts, some folks were frustrated that the Senate could not stop some of the cabinet nominees because of the majority vote rule that Mitch McConnell and Harry Reid had negotiated. But the flip side of that enabled President Obama to get many judges confirmed to the federal bench over his term. So that if you look at, there's 13 federal district courts, and 10 of those federal district courts have a majority of federal judges who were appointed by environmentally friendly presidents. So we've already seen in some of the immigration results, and we're starting to see it on some clean water cases, that federal judges take the law very seriously. They don't have a fact-free zone. They have the law in front of them. So we at NRDC are really doubling down on litigation. You're going to see a lot more of that. The other thing that we are redoubling on is you're going to see tomorrow with Earth Day and the Science March, and also with the Women's March. NRDC was the sponsor, the climate sponsor of the Women's March. And our President Rhea Sue was there in Washington, D.C. We'll be there tomorrow. Our science director, Tina Swanson, is going to be featured in the Science March here in San Francisco. So we're really linking arms with a broader constituency. And, we've always worked in close coalition with folks, so, whether it's business or labor or veterans or faith groups, youth groups, and we are focusing more and more on that and to form a broader working majority and give voice to, I think, what is a climate majority in the United States. I mean, every time you do a poll, you get, whether it's California or nationally, you get a majority of folks that think we should be doing something about clean air, clean water, and the climate. We actually commissioned a poll after the election, and we surveyed Trump voters. And 60% of Trump voters think we should be doing something about the climate. So, we're looking more and more on, continuing to hold the line in the courts, but also trying to figure out how do we give a voice to the majority of folks in the country who actually want something to happen.
And obviously, you're a national organization with that type of reach. Are you seeing other NGOs that may be more California or West Coast centric reaching out and establishing increasing relationships with peers across the country at that subnational level? Absolutely. Chair Nichols talked about the Under 2 MOU. Yeah. And, one of the things that I appreciate with the governor is that he always says, California's big, but we can't do it alone. So NRDC is working in Oregon right now. The Oregon legislature is considering putting a price on carbon, and they've done a great, our partner up there, Renew Oregon, which is an NGO leading the campaign there, they've done a great job of bringing in labor and bringing in businesses so that they come up with a solution that they can get a broad enough support for in their legislature. So, and a lot of them are looking to California as to how we made those connections. I always have to give a shout out to PG&E because you were one of the first major employers that came in on support of AB 32, and it was a real turning point actually on the bill when we could get a major utility like that to support the bill, and that's set a standard for other states to look at. So it's not just Oregon, but also
end of last year, I think, or was it earlier this year, where the Republican governor in Ohio actually vetoed a bill that would have rolled back their renewable portfolio standard. We're seeing the Republican governor in Illinois who is, signed a bill on clean energy. So it's not just on the West Coast or the left coast.
Right.
It's we're focusing a lot on Midwest and some of those swing states.
Thank you. So let's shift a little bit to talk about spheres of action for your utilities. And each of you, I think, had mentioned some work that you've done, internally within your own four walls of your businesses, so to speak, either on mitigation or on adaptation, resilience issues. But we had talked a little bit about how, there are a few spheres of influence: the internal, the working with your customers to help motivate them to different behaviors, and then working at a national or more broadly based platform with some of your peer companies across the country. Can you talk a little bit more about how, as an organization, you think about those different ways of engaging?
Absolutely. I can take a crack. It's a meaty topic, so there's a lot that we could talk about. But I think you mentioned sort of within the operations of the business, and I think that's a really important place to start, is doing everything we can to reduce the footprint of our business, and some of that is closely linked with California's policies, as you referenced. So really working hard to deliver cleaner energy to our customers, for example. But what we've seen, is lots of pockets of innovation within our business around different sources of emissions. And so one of those are those trucks that you see, driving around your neighborhoods, those PG&E trucks, and really looking at how can we use our vehicle fleet to pilot, new types of battery storage technologies. And I've been doing that for many years, and it's great because we talked a little bit earlier about replicability and scale and things like that. Not unique to PG&E. There are a lot of businesses out there that operate fleets, and so I'll just give you one example. One project has been looking at battery storage on those trucks, so that when the trucks are in your neighborhood, doing work, you literally turn off the engine, and it's the battery that powers the lighting and the air conditioning and the boom and all of that, which has a lot of benefits. It's safer because the people that are up working can hear the people down on the ground because it's quieter. It's less noisy, right, for the neighborhood. Cleaner from an emission standpoint. Also saves money because you're not wasting all that fuel. And the companies that are actually manufacturing these trucks for us are here locally in California. So there's a whole jobs component to it. And so we've been building on that over the last couple of years. And the new twist to that is expanding the batteries within these trucks so that they have the potential to export power to the grid. So you think about the truck as a kind of a mobile battery storage system, so that the idea is in the future could literally have a truck power the neighborhood while work is taking place, so that from the customer's perspective, there was no loss in electricity service, but it's just kind of a neat way of thinking about it. There's also an emergency response, component to it. We've used some of these trucks to help power equipment during, wildfires and things like that at the sites where the communities, gather. So that's just one example of a part of our business where really trying to think creatively and work with others to pilot, new ways of doing things within our fleet. And then you mentioned the customers. I think, that's just a wealth of activity there, and has been for a long time, going back to the 70s, when California really got the ball rolling around energy efficiency. And I'll just give you one example that maybe ties together a couple of the things that we've been talking about in terms of engaging people, but also cities. They're not represented here, but they're a real hotbed of activity on climate action and leadership, including here in San Francisco. But we piloted a new energy efficiency effort called Step Up and Power Down with San Francisco and San Jose, targeting the businesses in the downtown, with kind of the idea that you really need to engage the people, that work in businesses. That's really the key to unlocking the power of saving energy. You can do things within the building to change the lighting and things of that nature, but it's really the people there that are so important. And so it had a real behavioral science, component to it, and behavior change, and had some fun with it. And there's there's lots of information on our website if you're interested in learning more. But different fun campaigns around. I'll just give you one example. I mean, some of it's funny, but it actually works. People adopting light switches, and you have like a little kit. You put mustaches and eyebrows and all this kind of stuff. But you personify. You're taking care of this particular light switch, so that if you see it, in a conference room or something like that, you're more apt to. It's like adopting a highway or something like that to take care of it. And so there was a number of these different campaigns that we ran within PG&E, but also businesses in San Jose and San Francisco did, and we exceeded our goals in terms of energy savings and engagement, and I think learned a lot along the way about just how to engage people in this and make it fun and have them kind of learn, and then hopefully those are habits then that they adopt and will do long lasting. I mean, it's just something as simple as turning off your computer when you leave your desk. If you get in the habit of doing that, then that can have a longer lasting impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you. That was very interesting. It sounds like Mr. Potato Head.
Yes, exactly.
It's always great to hear what kind of marketing innovations come up with programs like that. I'll kind of offer the macro perspective. SoCal Gas recently had a new CEO join us, Patty Wagner. So her most recent job was growing solar and wind installations. She led over 2,000 megawatts of renewable energy projects before coming to SoCal Gas as our CEO. So we're really excited by the macro perspective that she brings. One thing that we have a hard time with, in all candor, and we're grateful for the leadership of NRDC and others at the national level, is that California is viewed as being on the leading edge, and we find that most pressing in the manufacturer community, who are trying to make decisions about, do they try to design towards California standards and specifications, or is it economically better for them just to not worry about it and focus on the other 49 states. So that's an area that we have been trying to exert leadership at the national level, working with various national labs, national organizations as well, to try to build the confidence and the certainty. Annie used that word earlier about giving the business community certainty. So we're trying to do what we can to show that California isn't an outlier. Rather, California is a leader. And it makes sense to invest in the more stringent types of technologies required to operate here today, because that will be how the rest of the country will go and those broader markets will open. So we work with trade organizations, we join coalitions where we can, but really try to use demonstration investments and new research and development investments to signal to the manufacturer community that makes sense to invest in cleaner technologies, not just for California.
And that's a great point. It gets back to where we started with motivations. And these are companies that aren't necessarily based here, don't necessarily need to operate in the sixth largest economy in the world, but that's okay. But are making that calculation, that it may not be, despite being the sixth largest, it may not actually be worth it to them financially, risk whatever the analytics may be, to be able to address this market. And so I think that's a great point to make in terms of your leadership, your company's leadership in trying to make that case in a very tangible and business-oriented way to help drive that behavioral change.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good example of the intersection between the NGO community, state incentives, regulation. The regulation doesn't help as much without the incentives and the education of that community.
Right.
So that's an area where you kind of need all those prongs coming together, and where the utilities can play an interesting role, given that we're quasi-governmental, we're subject to significant regulations from the California Public Utilities Commission and others. We have historically played a stimulative role in advancing some new technologies and driving energy efficiency. So I think that's a role we hope to continue to be able to play to bring newer technologies to market. So.
I mean, as big as we are, again, we can't do it alone, and I think that that's one of the reasons NRDC is really looking at integrating the grid so that we can work with a network of Western states. Also, I just really like to pick up on what Chris was talking about. It's just the individual action. That's probably the single most frequent question that we get is, what can I do? Now they're not just asking what they can do to save energy, but they're also asking what they can do politically. So, but I think that, the more that we can bring things to the individual level, the greater change we'll see.
So thank you for letting me borrow your telephone. We are at about 10:30, and I would love to see if we've got questions from all of you, so we can get you engaged in this conversation as well. I don't know if we do this with microphones from the audience. Anybody with any questions, comments? Maybe I have the microphone. No? No? Oh, there's somebody in the back.
Lithium batteries, the lithium battery storage, and I've heard that lithium batteries are fairly flammable, and I just was wondering if that's going to be a problem with battery storage, or are they solving that problem?
Yeah, on the battery storage, I think we're at a really exciting time, particularly here in California, where we're being encouraged to deploy different types of batteries, within our system. I can't speak to that specifically, but what I will tell you is that what we've been doing over the past couple of years, and what we'll continue to be doing, is testing different types of battery storage within our system to understand how they operate and how they integrate into the grid to help, particularly as we add increasing amounts of renewable energy to the grid. We've got a battery storage system up in Vacaville, near our Vaca-Dixon substation. We've got one down in San Jose, and then I think we just brought online one of the Tesla systems, each doing slightly different things, and that's kind of where we are as a PG&E. I know the other utilities are all doing slightly different projects to really test how does this system work. And we're also looking at it more at the distributed level, doing a lot of different pilot projects. I'll just give you one example of that. It's called the DERMS system, which is another acronym for you. But the idea is it's a partnership that we have down in San Jose with GE, Solar City, and a company called Green Charge Networks. And what we're doing down there is, these are customers, residential and commercial with solar, is we're installing battery storage and smart inverters on both the homes and at the businesses. And that's kind of the role of Solar City and Green Charge Networks. And then what GE is adding is sort of think about it as the brains of the system that ties all these systems together with PG&E, so we can better understand the flow of electricity around that system and really better optimize the system. And what's exciting about it is it'll be an opportunity for all of us to learn how our roles, within that system, the interoperability of all these systems with all the new technologies that are coming out. It's really important to test them and see how they interact and how they work, so that we can deploy that elsewhere, on our system. And so that's just an example of how we're beginning to really apply battery storage within our system, so that outside of the vehicles, we can test new ways of managing the grid, particularly as you have more intermittent, renewable resources that we're trying to manage during the course of the day.
Just to add, I think that we would all agree that storage is the critical underpinning to the renewable energy future, particularly as we start looking at 100% RPS in the future. So there's battery storage. That's one set of technologies with some concerns like what you raised, and it sounds like there's work going on to address that. The power to gas that I mentioned earlier is another form of technology that can support storage of renewable electricity. So I think that's another opportunity for investment, for entrepreneurs, for manufacturers to consider is what are the various forms of storage, renewable storage, that can be most effective to support the future.
Great point. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Hi, so I'm down from Washington State. We have several efforts to get a price on carbon, and we're pushing against a really hard wall. And so the energy-intensive, trade-exposed companies, they are united about doing nothing. And they do not want to they don't want to be pushed. And so what kind of tactics would you use in general to kind of get at these companies to kind of change their mindset to want to do the right thing, I guess would be the word.
Me to start on that?
There's like a steel manufacturer, there's fertilizer plants, there's these guys don't want to touch this stuff till they're forced to.
Well, I think in California, it really does start with the people. And the voters in California elect members of the state legislature who support climate action. And I'm pretty familiar with the state of Washington Senate, which needs, I think, two more. Okay. I didn't know his name, but I know there's just one more climate-friendly legislator that the state Senate needs, and then Governor Inslee, who is a big climate champion, especially when it comes to the oceans, and has really already helped a lot in bringing California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia together into the Pacific Climate Initiative. So people and voters is important. I think also some peer pressure from other businesses and demonstrating that you can have, thriving utilities, healthy economy, and combat greenhouse gas emissions at the same time. I mean, that is important, but I think also that's what we're really, without the federal Clean Power Plan, because of the Trump administration, how are we going to hold some of these states accountable is a tough question. I think they're also, we're going to look at any legal handles we can. But I feel like Washington is on the cusp of being able to do something after November 2018. I hope.
I'm reminded too of something that Chris had mentioned on our prep call too, which is about the longer term business impacts of climate change, rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and how those might affect some of the companies where they're operating. Now, most businesses nowadays seem to operate on a quarter by quarter basis, but I think we're seeing increasingly responsible boards who really are thinking into the future and how those changes can affect some of the companies who otherwise might not think that climate change is their problem to solve. I think they might find, if they look, that there are some considerations that could immediately impact their businesses.
If I could piggyback on that, the risky business is an example of a report that really started to articulate what are some of the business risks of a changing climate. And I know there's a lot of activity happening in the state of California, and I think in the region, on this as well, is really trying to understand what does that look like? What is that future of more extreme weather, storms, wildfires, heat waves, rising sea levels? What's the science telling us so that we act now? It's sort of the other side of the coin of reducing emissions is beginning to act. And for utilities, we're a place-based company. We are here in the communities and with a lot of infrastructure, and so I think you're starting to see a lot of activity with companies like that, where it's important that we work together with communities, with cities, to, on the one hand, really understand, do some forecasting about what's projected to occur, and then how do we begin to plan. Now there's a lot of activity here in the Bay Area, but just I think throughout California, and utilities across the country as well. Whether it's Con Ed and PSEG after Superstorm Sandy, or even Hurricane Katrina. There's a lot of lessons learned from utilities across the country that we are sharing with each other, so that we can help. Just on that topic, one way we're thinking about it, and it's very similar to maybe your earlier question about the spheres, if you will, is on the resilient side is, you have the business. So this is PG&E and all of our infrastructure, but we're connected to a whole supply chain, the rest of the grid, the rest of the natural gas system, telecommunications, all of that. And then the other side is all the customers and the communities that we serve. And so it's all connected, and the more that the communities are resilient, the more that PG&E is resilient, and vice versa. Same thing with supply chain. So it's kind of a hard thing to get your arms around, but that's how we're thinking about it. And I think that's how the state is thinking about what research do we need to do to understand how to kind of connect those dots and address it. One of the things that we've done recently on the community side is a grant program called the Resilient Communities Grant Program, which we're kind of excited about. This is the first year of it, but it's a 5-year program. It was $1 million shareholder-funded commitment, so $200,000 a year in grants for communities, and each year it's going to be a different climate risk. So this is the first year, and it's addressing projects addressing increasing wildfire risk. And so the RFP period is still open, so you can still apply between now and mid-May. But we're really excited to see what we get back, because it'll be an opportunity for us to really hear from our communities. What are the needs? And then one of the questions in the application is, what other risks should we be considering, in the future, so that we're really partnering and supporting communities. And there's a focus on disadvantaged communities, because I think maybe to your point, those are the most vulnerable communities to a changing climate. So we're prioritizing projects that address underserved communities, which I think is really important.
Yeah, one other thing I was thinking of too is that policy does matter, and that's one of the reasons that we really think having an integrated Western grid is important, because if you can allow clean energy to get in the market more broadly, it's going to win on the economics, and it will displace some of the dirtier supply. So if your local utilities are starting to lose on the market, that would also incentivize them.
Yeah. I could give you mine.
I wanted to piggyback on that last question, which I think was excellent. We've been hearing a lot of great innovative ideas that you're employing to help decarbonize the economy. Obviously helps to have political support for the actions you're taking. But as we all know, we're dealing with stakeholders out there that are either ambivalent about action or in some cases downright hostile. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what strategies are you employing to reach out to your stakeholder community and just educate them on the need for action and the wisdom of the steps that you think you need to take?
Yes, well, similar to Chris's company, SoCal Gas has an environmental dialogue, so we're kind of shoring up our communications and finding areas of alignment with the environmental community. At the same time, as we also have an obligation towards our disadvantaged communities who do have a slightly different set of concerns. They're not concerned about carbon. They're concerned about the fact that they still live near a major freeway corridor, and their asthma rates are higher still, in spite of all the progress I described earlier, than anywhere else. So working with the disadvantaged communities is another thing that's really important important to us. And then there's our customers who have various needs ranging from resilience and affordability to some of them have a mandate to participate in the greenhouse gas low carbon economy. So I think as a utility, we try to listen to all the different stakeholder groups and align it with where we think the path is that we can make the most progress towards supporting the different agendas. From my perspective, there's no panacea or silver bullet to that, but we do find we invest a lot of time and we hire a lot of folks who have the connections and who are able to form those dialogues. So in the legislative season, during various proceedings, I think we're very active. We try to be very active in understanding all the points of view and finding where the common ground can be to advance.
I would just say, I mean, it's a really complex challenge. I mean, as utilities, we're something unique in that we serve everybody, you know, and so we have, our customers are very different. You know, we serve a large service area here in California, and so some customers are you know, very focused on the cost, you know, of our service and anything we can do to help make our service more affordable. Others are, and this is a growing segment, I think, of our customer base, are very interested in technology and how can we, you know, provide information and how can they engage with us, you know, in that way. So it's, in part, is not a one-size-fits-all. It's really trying to listen and understand the different types of customers you have so you can meet them where they are. We actually did some focus groups last year on sustainability with our customers, and I mean, what it sort of boils down to is clean energy, you know, at an affordable price, and they're looking for the utilities to also be planning ahead and thinking ahead and planning for the future, because when it comes down to it, it's the future generations, you know, that we're all making decisions about today that you know, we want to be thinking out for, and so it's. You know, and so there's a lot of different ways. One is leveraging the data, you know, that we get through smart meters, so that we can share that with people. And there's lots of examples of that where we've demonstrated that by, you know, sharing with somebody how their energy use compares with, you know, 100 homes, you know, in their neighborhood. That peer pressure component, it actually motivates people to take action, and that's kind of the first, most important step, is to get people to sort of pay attention. And then provide them with things that they can do, incentive programs. We have training. There's actually a Pacific Energy Center, for a PG&E Energy Training Center, just right across the street from this hotel, where we're training people doing solar classes, architects, engineers. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's, I think, trying to meet people where they are and you know, try different things that'll motivate them to take action, and then having you know, new programs for them to take advantage of.
I think that you know, really identified a huge challenge that we have right now with the Trump administration. And, you know, I can't overstate how disheartening it was for the auto companies, for example, that had worked with us in the Obama administration to come up with higher CAFE standards to see, you know, to just see, oh, we got a new sheriff in town, let's try and, you know, fall back from our commitments. But I think that's where we're going to really need to see more businesses step up and make real investments in a clean economy, so that you can demonstrate to this administration that there's, you know, money to be made in a clean economy. I think that is going to be something that they may listen to. And I think, you know, we are going to really be, you know, looking to the business community to be a leader in the face of this hostility that we've got right now. Because that was, you know, if that's what we're going to see at the federal level, is like, oh, well, we'll follow whatever rules are in town. We'll try to get out of, you know, whatever commitments we made. If we don't have to do our homework, we won't. You know, that's a problem. So it is going to be you know, important for business to stand up.
I've had a related experience in a project that we worked on at Valley Vision, which was focused on, it was called the Business Resiliency Initiative, and it was actually focused on very, very small businesses, which in an economy in aggregate make up an enormous proportion of employment, job space, and economic output in any economy across our country. And so we took this business resiliency initiative specifically, we took it on specifically because Sacramento, at the confluence of two rivers, is fairly prone to flooding, or fairly at risk of flooding. And because of the aggregate economic impact that could happen in a major flood to a whole host of small businesses who are generally the worst, the small size of them, generally the worst prepared, the least expert, the least resilient. They usually operate out of one location, for example, and the least able to respond to disaster. And so we took a very pragmatic, hands-on approach, very action-oriented. These are the steps you should take ahead of catastrophe to prepare for catastrophe and to be better able to survive it. But the interesting thing is, again, to your point about meeting people where they are, we chose in some portions of our 6-county region to not talk about this in the framework of climate change, because the main message we wanted to get across was motivating toward action and motivating toward making your own business, which is your livelihood, more resilient and more secure. And we really, honestly, in some communities did not want to. It would not have been productive to have engaged in a discussion about climate change, and if it was a thing. And so we took the message really down to disasters are increasing. Wildfire risk is increasing. Flood risk is increasing. We don't need to talk about why. But that's the reality on the ground. And so it was really, and it felt, honestly, I'll be very candid, it felt to me a little bit intellectually dishonest to not root it back into the realities of climate change and what that is doing to our world. But keeping our eyes on the end goal, which was actually getting these small businesses to pay attention and take some action on their own behalf, that was the overall objective. And if in so doing it made them a little bit better prepared for disasters that are going to be more frequent because there happens to be climate change, then that was a good side effect. It wasn't an opportunity necessarily to preach about climate change to audiences who would not have been receptive to it and would then not have listened to the rest of the message. So it really was a question of meeting them where they are. And I'd love to have changed a whole bunch of hearts and minds, but on the climate change aspect of it. But it was, I think we did some good in the very pragmatic, action-oriented piece of it.
And just to build on that, and on Annie's point about needing to bring businesses on board, I think it's sometimes in the policy discussions about climate change, it can be no carbon, no matter what the cost. This is a catastrophe, and we have to move forward. And so we find pretty expensive things happening where there may be an alternative that is pretty low carbon at a much lower cost. So I think the policy community and the legislators and others, stakeholders, really need to think through, is it the panacea?
This is an active conversation that we're having right now.
the panacea of here's how it has to be, or a more incremental approach. And that's one that we find ourselves stepping through a lot. Thank you.
So I'd love to dive into pragmatic incentives, particularly on the utility side, to really scale up distributed generation, solar in particular, and where you see your role there. As a personal vignette, I grew up on a small farm in Mendocino County, which just joined on to the Community Choice Aggregation Plan for Sonoma County, which now is actually incentivizing me to build out a solar system that's even bigger than my household needs. And if I want, I can link up all my neighbors' accounts, and they'll pay me for any excess generation beyond zero. This is something that we wanted to do through PG&E for years and got no support in doing it. So I'm curious where you see PG&E's role, utilities in general's role, in actually just giving people direct financial incentives to not only meet their needs from their own solar systems, but even feedback into the grid. And what incentive structures you're planning to roll out to encourage that? I understand you have some, locked in infrastructure that you need to pay for and the lines to pay for and whatnot. So having charges that actually keep that moving are important. But what can you offer me as a stakeholder with a system that actually just financially directly incentivizes me to feed more clean energy into the grid?
Sure. Well, it's a complex, question and an issue, and one that I think that it's not just relevant for California, but for states, across the country. And we've seen, just an incredible growth in solar, here in the state of California. I think we passed, 275,000, rooftop solar customers. We're approaching 300,000. I think it's something like every 10 minutes or 5, 6, 7 minutes, we're interconnecting another solar customer to the grid, which is really awesome. And the question for the state is just what's the regulatory framework for ensuring that we continue, the growth of solar for the state of California, while at the same time just thinking about how those costs are incurred by customers who currently don't have solar on their rooftop. And I think we'll get there. But it's a challenging question, and it's really gets to the heart of the kind of the regulatory model, for utilities as our industry is changing so quickly. Technology is changing at a really fast pace, and so the regulations, need to keep up with that. And it's a lively conversation, here in California. But I think we have the opportunity to get it right, and then that can serve as a model for other states and other parts of the country. And you think about electric vehicle adoption. I think 1 in 5 electric vehicles, are PG&E customers. And some of the projects that I mentioned around, battery storage and the thing that we're doing with Solar City are ways to manage, the grid with, these high levels of solar, coming onto the system. So there's an operational, component, to this as well. So I don't have a simple, answer other than that, we want to continue to work together and find the right solution that's going to work for all of our customers, throughout the country. And I think we'll get there.
I'll add, for SoCal Gas, we don't deliver electricity like PG&E does. We're a gas-only utility, but we're very pleased. Recently, we got a draft decision on a new shareholder investment program where SoCal Gas shareholders would be prepared to invest in distributed energy resources to help accelerate customer adoption of those. So we hope that will get resolved soon. And we have a number of other incentive programs, again, several shareholder funded, where we are interested in helping customers move on to distributed energy resources and help buying down those first costs. And I should note, as I was talking, that because that is still an active proceeding, if there is anyone from the California Public Utilities Commission in here, to please make me aware of that, and we can handle that appropriately. I'll be at the back door there at the end of this.
Nice disclaimer.
So I think we have just a few minutes left, and I'd like to do a little bit of wrap up and ask each of our panelists to reflect a little bit on what you see from either the business or the nonprofit, or the business and nonprofit working together perspective, what you see as the greatest opportunities in the next 3 to 5 years, shall we say, for this sector of our economy to have the biggest impact on meeting our climate objectives. And because I hadn't prepped this question with you ahead of time, I'll buy some time by answering it first myself. And just to say that in the Sacramento region, I'm involved with a collaboration, an informal collaboration of entities that we call the Capital Region Climate Readiness Collaborative. And that collaboration itself is part of a statewide collaboration, which is called the Alliance of Regional Collaborations for Climate Adaptation. So we got a lot of cool acronyms there. That one's called ARCA. But in the Capital Region Climate Readiness Collaborative, that is a group of partners. It's a very informal structure. Our chair is here at the conference today, Kathleen Ave from SMUD, and I serve as vice chair. But it's that makes it sound really formal. It's a very informal collaboration of partners that has been working together for probably the last 3 years or so, cutting across public sector, private sector, and the nonprofit sector, of players in the region who are both interested in and engaged with helping with issues of climate adaptation specifically. And each of these collaboratives across the state, there's 5 of them, at the moment. Each of them is involved in working within their own regions and helping to prepare their own regions better for climate adaptation, but also bringing a plethora of voices to the state policy and regulatory platforms by providing input, by providing comment, by showing up at public hearings. And these collaboratives are more than the sum of their parts because we have a proven track record of working together so effectively. I think the input that we provide, for example, to the Strategic Growth Council or to ARB or to other state entities can carry some heft with it. And so I'm really encouraged by that growth of these collaborative efforts because it has been very grassroots and because it is multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder in nature.
Well, I'll build on that a little bit. I guess I would say I really see, the kind of the let a million flowers bloom model, and that we have, whether it's at the state level or at the city level, as Chris mentioned, I mean, the cities and mayors are doing an amazing amount on climate, and they actually do meet people more around the pothole, for example. And so I think mayors are, moving forward. I think when I had the honor to be in Paris at the last COP, they, there was this sense that, getting an agreement was inevitable because there were people from all over the world and from every walk of life and every level of government that was saying, we got to do something. And I think that there's that momentum now. There's like with or without President Trump, we are going to do something. And we are doing something. And I think that there's that motivation for more people to get involved in government and to show up. It's really critical that we keep that energy alive, that we are not in a sprint right now. This has to be sustained. But if we continue to show up and we continue to make good policy that works for everyone and for our economy, that will be the future. So I really have a lot of hope. We're looking at local and state and subnational bodies that are said, to hell with this. We're gonna move forward, and that's really, I think, very inspiring.
That's a great point about cities and mayors. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and we also appreciate the, this certainty again that is afforded, at least in the state, by staying on track and not being daunted by the federal policies. The thing I'm most excited about right now, it's kind of tactical, but in June we are going to be injecting into our pipeline system renewable gas that was generated from green waste by a waste hauler in Southern California. So they've been in the community for years. It's the green bins that they're taking. They're applying a process called anaerobic digestion, and they're creating renewable gas that's going to be the first step towards decarbonizing our pipeline system. So I'm super excited about that in June, and that in concert with the provisions of SB 1383 from last year, which directs the Commission to direct utilities to support similar projects, but with dairy waste. We are very excited about gearing up with that. The dairy waste is a twofer because it addresses the short-lived climate pollutants. Instead of the methane emitting to atmosphere, we're able to capture it, condition it, and then use it to displace fossil gas. So that's a whole program area that I'm most excited about, and that has really fired on all cylinders of legislation, regulation, incentives, and commercial interests.
Wonderful. And Chris, you get the last word.
The last word. Mm-hmm. Well, I would just say, maybe to kind of wrap up a lot of what we've been talking about, for the utilities and many others in California, the sustainability story is just closely linked to California's policy and regulatory, leadership, and utilities are a partner, in that journey. I think one of the things that we've come to realize is just the critical importance of the grid, to the future, thinking about it almost like as the Internet of Things, the grid being the thing that ties together, all these different devices. And so utilities will continue to be, I think, a critical part. But we also can help scale, a lot of the solutions that we're coming up with today. And I think the journey continues in California with support for extending cap and trade, to 2030, and working with the regulators and the policymakers and the legislatures to make this all a success. So I think the future is bright.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. And I can hear there's people out there, so maybe that's where we're going next.
Thank you, Meg.